The galaxy had been at war for centuries. Civilizations rose and fell. Empires expanded and contracted, each convinced of its own supremacy. The Exarthak boasted fleets so massive they could blot out entire stars, their ships bristling with weapons that reduced planets to molten husks within hours. The Valkyrie wielded shields and armaments that rendered entire systems impregnable, their military doctrine perfected over millennia of conquest. The Glithari Confederation, a coalition of numerous advanced species, controlled trade, diplomacy, and technology across countless quadrants, dictating the flow of resources and a lion-clad grip. In this meticulously balanced cosmos of power, one species seemed insignificant to species the galaxy had long dismissed as primitive, fragile, and ultimately inconsequential. That species was humanity. Humans existed on the peripheries, their colonies scattered at the edges of known space. They were often ignored, scoffed at, and sometimes attacked as nuisances rather than threats. Alien historians documented them as short-lived and ill-equipped for interstellar survival. Even the Exarthak, known for their brutal pragmatism, had little respect for humanity, regarding them as unworthy of serious consideration. The humans' fleet was small, their ships modest, and their technology, while innovative, lacked the raw, destructive power of the larger empires. To the galaxy, humans were barely worth a footnote. And yet, among the human ranks, there was one who would defy every expectation. General Selene Kyle was born on a colony world at the very edge of the Orion Arm, a planet so isolated it was nearly forgotten by the Terran Council for decades. Its surface was harsh and unforgiving. Jagged mountains tore into steel-gray skies, and storms of ionized dust swept across barren plains with relentless fury. The settlers who called it home were rugged, self-reliant, and fiercely independent traits that Selene inherited. From a young age, she learned to read the weather in 1,000 subtle ways, to anticipate dangers before they arrived, and to think several steps ahead in any endeavor. While alien commanders relied on vast fleets and centuries of protocol, Selene's strength was rooted in adaptability, intuition, and the ability to see opportunities in chaos. By the time she was appointed General of the Terran Expeditionary Forces, Selene's reputation was already formidable among humans, even if alien species remained blissfully unaware. She was unorthodox, daring, and utterly unpredictable, where others sought to match enemy numbers or mirror strategies. She embraced creativity and flexibility, leveraging the very limitations of her forces as advantages. She understood that to survive, humans could not fight like the Exarthak, Valkyrie, or Glithari. They had to fight differently, in ways that no opponent could anticipate. The first true test of her genius came at the Battle of Cygnus Prime. The Exarthak Empire had mustered a fleet 10 times the size of hers, confident that the humans would be annihilated before they could even mount an effective defense. Their warlords, arrogant and assured in the supremacy of their species, laughed at the small Terran fleet. "They are insects, clinging to a rock," one Exarthak admiral declared, his voice booming across the fleet's comms channels, dripping with contempt. "We will crush them without effort. There is no human alive who can challenge our might." But Selene Kyle had learned a lesson the galaxy's empires had never understood. The strength of a species is measured not in numbers alone, nor in the sheer power of its weapons, but in its ability to adapt, to endure, and to innovate when confronted with impossibility. She did not intend to meet the Exarthak in direct combat, where her fleet would be annihilated within minutes. Instead, she crafted a strategy that would exploit the very arrogance that the enemy depended upon. The Terran fleet was divided into unpredictable vectors. Some ships feigned retreats, drawing enemy cruisers into carefully constructed ambush zones. Others projected holographic duplicates, creating the illusion of a much larger fleet, while stealth strike teams infiltrated the enemy lines, sabotaging fuel depots, communications arrays, and supply convoys. Sci-Fi officers, trained to anticipate the predictable patterns of conventional warfare, were thrown into confusion. By the time they recognized the deception, half of their fleet was stranded and disorganized, trapped in unfamiliar sectors of space with their coordination crippled. As the human forces maneuvered with precision, striking from angles no one could anticipate, Celine's voice crackled across the fleet's communications network. "Focus on adaptability," she commanded. "Every obstacle is an opportunity. Every enemy assumption is a weakness. We do not merely fight to survive. We fight to change the outcome, to prove that humanity cannot be underestimated." Her words carried not only authority, but the certainty that humans could overcome the odds. The battle was a turning point. What had begun as an encounter the galaxy assumed would be a massacre became a decisive human victory. Ships that were thought expendable executed maneuvers that no simulator could have predicted. Enemy capital ships were disabled before they could fire their first volleys. Supply chains were cut, morale crumbled, and the Exarthok found themselves facing not just an adversary, but a force operating on a level of creativity and adaptability they could not comprehend. In the aftermath, Celine addressed her crews, her gaze sweeping across the fleet through the comm channels, every human soldier, pilot, and technician aware that they had achieved something extraordinary. "They underestimated us," she said quietly but with absolute conviction. "They believed our limitations would define us. They thought we would fight as others fight. They were wrong. Humanity survives because we adapt. Humanity prevails because we refuse to quit. Today, we have shown the galaxy what it truly means to be human." News of the Terran victory spread like wildfire across neighboring systems. Even distant allies who had previously questioned human capabilities began to take note. Humans were no longer a species to be ignored. The Exarthok, furious and humiliated, began to reconsider their assumptions. The galaxy, long confident in its hierarchy, realized that something fundamental had changed. Humanity, small in numbers and underestimated, had proven that audacity, ingenuity, and the indomitable will to survive could defy the greatest odds. Celine Kyle's mind was already at work on the next campaign. The victory at Cygnus Prime had demonstrated the effectiveness of unpredictability and innovation, but she knew that the galaxy would adapt if humans did not continue to evolve their strategies. Every battle, every maneuver was not just about winning, it was about teaching the galaxy a lesson. One that would resonate across light years and centuries. Never, under any circumstances, underestimate humanity. As the Terran fleet reformed, battered but undefeated, Celine looked out through the flagship's observation deck at the stars stretching endlessly before her. Each point of light represented a potential threat, an unknown variable, and yet it also represented opportunity. Humanity had returned to the galactic stage, not as a minor participant, but a force capable of reshaping the universe itself. And in the quiet confidence of that moment, she knew that this was only the beginning. For the galaxy had laughed at humanity, confident in their insignificance. They had assumed that a handful of humans could never change the course of history. They were about to discover that a single human general, one mind, one will, one vision, could alter the fate of an entire galaxy. And General Celine Kyle, with the ingenuity, courage, and unbreakable spirit of her species, was prepared to show them exactly how. The Valkyrie Armada was unlike anything humanity had faced before. Where the Exithok relied on sheer numbers, the Valkyrie relied on precision, impenetrable shields, and weapons capable of disintegrating entire squadrons in seconds. Their doctrine emphasized overwhelming force, flawless coordination, and an unyielding confidence in their technology. They had never encountered a species that did not fear them. They had never encountered humans. General Celine Kyle did not intend to confront the Valkyrie head-on. That approach, she knew, would be suicide. Their capital ships could annihilate a human cruiser before it could even lock its weapons. Their planetary defense platforms would shred any attempt at orbital support. Celine understood that victory would not come from matching power with power. It would come from turning the Valkyrie's confidence into their weakness. Her plan was audacious. She retrofitted mundane cargo vessels' ships deemed slow and unfit for combat into cloaked strike platforms. Every vessel was equipped with modified energy cannons, stealth generators, and sensor jamming technology. The fleet was then dispersed across the asteroid fields bordering Valkyrie space, hiding among the jagged rocks where the Valkyrie assumed no threats could exist. It was a gamble. If discovered too soon, the ships would be annihilated before they could act. Yet Celine trusted in the ingenuity of her crews and the unpredictability of human strategy. When the Valkyrie fleet arrived, they were confident, as always. "These humans are clever, but fragile," their commander boasted. "We will crush them with precision and speed. Nothing on their side can match us." But the humans had anticipated every conventional expectation. As the Valkyrie formation advanced, stealth strike platforms emerged from the asteroid fields like ghosts. They fired in synchronized precision, striking engines, weapons arrays, and shield generators with a speed no Valkyrie sensors could track. Within hours, several capital ships were disabled or drifting powerless, vulnerable to further attack. Yet, Celine's true genius was not in the technology alone. It was in how she used human soldiers. Each crew member had been trained to think creatively under pressure, to improvise, and to act independently while remaining coordinated with the larger fleet. While the Valkyrie relied on rigid hierarchies and pre-programmed protocols, the humans were free to adapt at every moment. A single cruiser could split its crew into teams handling navigation, weapons, repairs, and hacking simultaneously, all communicating through encrypted channels invisible to the enemy. Every engagement became a dynamic ballet of innovation and improvisation. In the Battle of the Orion Rift, Celine's tactics reached new heights. A lone human cruiser executed a maneuver that had never been attempted in recorded history. The ship aligned with a dense asteroid cluster, using the rocks to reflect enemy missile targeting arrays. Then, with a combination of thruster bursts and shield modulation, it redirected an entire salvo of Valkyrie missiles back into the approaching fleet. The resulting destruction was catastrophic. A formation that had considered itself invincible was reduced to scattered wreckage, their confidence shattered in moments. News of these victories spread throughout the galaxy. Even neutral systems began to whisper the name Celine Kyle. Allies who had previously doubted humanity's capabilities now sought counsel, hoping to learn even fragments of the methods that allowed humans to outmaneuver the Valkyrie. Enemies grew wary, adjusting strategies, only to find that the unpredictability of human thought could never be fully anticipated. Selene understood that the true advantage of humans lay not in ships, not in firepower, and not in numbers. It lay in the very nature of the species. Humans were adaptable, resilient, and fearless in the face of uncertainty. Where alien fleets followed rules, algorithms, and rigid training, humans improvised. They used setbacks as opportunities, mistakes as learning points, and desperation as fuel for innovation. One human mind, one general willing to push boundaries, could leverage these traits into outcomes that defied expectation. The Valkyrie, for all their sophistication, began to fear the unpredictability of the Terrans. They had never encountered a species willing to take calculated risks that defied all conventional military wisdom. They had never faced an adversary capable of converting every limitation into an advantage. And most importantly, they had never fought a species that refused to surrender regardless of the odds. Selene's influence extended beyond mere tactics. She taught her soldiers that victory came from creativity and courage, not obedience alone. Small teams could achieve feats that entire armadas could not. Improvisation became an art form. Adaptability became a weapon. The human will became an unstoppable force. Entire fleets, once considered insignificant, now became unpredictable storms of destruction when guided by her strategies. The Valkyrie campaign also revealed another essential aspect of human warfare: psychological impact. The very unpredictability of humans unnerved their enemies. Valkyrie commanders, trained to anticipate every eventuality, found themselves second-guessing every move. Morale crumbled, not because of losses alone, but because their confidence in their own superiority was systematically dismantled. Each ambush, each unexpected strike, each counterintuitive maneuver forced them into a defensive posture, making them hesitant, reactive, and ultimately vulnerable. Selene's fleet, in contrast, moved like a single organism, yet every component retained its autonomy. Each captain understood the broader strategy, yet had the freedom to adapt to circumstances in real time. Human ingenuity became the fulcrum of war, tipping battles in favor of the Terrans even when numerical and technological superiority was lacking. By the end of the Valkyrie campaign, the galaxy's perception of humanity had begun to shift. What had once been considered a minor, expendable species was now seen as a formidable, unpredictable, and highly dangerous opponent. Humans had demonstrated that a small, cohesive force with ingenuity and courage could achieve victories that empires of billions could not. Selene Kyle had proven that the essence of humanity, adaptation, audacity, and resilience, was more potent than any weapon, shield, or fleet size. Across countless systems, whispers spread. Humans were not just survivors, they were innovators, strategists, and forces that could defy the most powerful empires. One human general had demonstrated the power of thinking differently, of embracing unpredictability, and of exploiting the assumptions of an overconfident enemy. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Even after the battle, Selene did not rest. She analyzed every engagement, studying enemy psychology, fleet movements, and environmental conditions to refine her strategies further. To her, every success was a lesson, every setback an opportunity to improve. The Valkyrie had been defeated, not just through force, but through creativity, adaptability, and the indomitable human spirit. And Selene knew that the next challenge would be even greater. The Galactic Confederation awaited, vast and unyielding, confident in their mastery of war. But Selene smiled. Humanity had already shown what it was capable of. One mind, one fleet, one species that refused to yield. This was a combination the galaxy had not anticipated, and one that would continue to defy expectation at every turn. The Glithari Confederation had been watching humanity's rise with a mix of disbelief and irritation. A species, once dismissed as inconsequential, had, in the span of a few decades, turned the balance of power on its head. The HFY had been embarrassed, the Valkyrie humiliated, and the galaxy had begun to whisper the same word in every starport and council chamber: Terran. Zarkath, the industrial and technological heart of the Glithari Confederation, represented the ultimate challenge. Entire fleets were built there. Vast shipyards produced warships at an unimaginable rate, and its cities housed engineers and scientists whose innovations kept the Confederation technologically ahead of most civilizations. The Glithari assumed that a species like humanity, fragile, small in number, and at the edge of their reach, could never hope to assault such a fortress. To them, humans had no hope of victory. General Celine Kyle, however, thrived on impossibility. Her fleet approached Zarkath with a calm, precise confidence that unnerved even her own crews. "They believe their defenses are absolute," she said quietly over the comm system. "They believe no human could breach them. Let's show them how wrong they are." Her plan was audacious, but it was also elegant. Celine would collapse Zarkath's defenses from within while simultaneously striking from orbit a multi-layered assault that required perfect timing, flawless coordination, and the full ingenuity of human soldiers. Special operations teams were the first to make their move. Pilots and engineers had transformed small cargo and maintenance vessels into stealthy infiltration platforms. These teams infiltrated Zarkath's industrial zones, slipping past sensors and automated defenses. They planted energy disruptors, hacked into power grids, and rerouted production lines to cripple the Confederation's ability to repair and resupply its forces. Factories that had once churned out warships and weapons now lay dormant, their assembly lines sabotaged from the inside. While the infiltrators worked in silence, Celine's orbital fleet positioned itself in a series of unpredictable vectors around the planet. Unlike traditional bombardments, her ships did not strike immediately. Instead, they used long-range precision weapons and synchronized strikes to disable orbital defenses, communications, satellites, and supply convoys. The aim was not merely destruction, it was disruption, confusion, and fear. Every moment of hesitation imposed on the enemy increased the effectiveness of the human assault. As the Confederation scrambled to respond, Celine's strategy revealed its brilliance. Entire divisions of Glithari defense forces were forced to confront phantom threats, misdirected attacks, and sabotaged infrastructure. Human ships appeared where they were least expected, sometimes emerging from asteroid belts, sometimes materializing from cloaked warp vectors. The psychological impact was devastating. Glithari commanders, trained for centuries in protocols and algorithms, could not anticipate the improvisation, audacity, and unorthodox tactics employed by humans. Within Zarkath itself, chaos reigned. Energy grids flickered and failed, transport lines jammed, and automated factories malfunctioned. Human sabotage teams moved like shadows, precise and lethal, disabling power nodes and communication hubs, then vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. It was not merely a battle, it was an orchestrated dismantling of an empire's heart, conducted by a species that the galaxy had underestimated at every turn. Celine's leadership style was as much a weapon as her fleet. She communicated with clarity, precision, and adaptability. Her orders emphasized initiative rather than obedience. Every captain and crew member understood the broader objective, yet retained the freedom to adapt to rapidly changing circumstances. Where alien fleets relied on rigid hierarchies, humans moved with a fluidity and unpredictability that made them nearly impossible to counter. The climax of the siege came when the Confederation attempted a counteroffensive. Hundreds of capital ships converged on the human fleet in an effort to crush the Terrans once and for all. But Celine had anticipated this. She split her fleet into decoy formations, luring the main force into traps where stealth strike vessels and orbital batteries awaited. In coordinated precision, the humans struck from multiple angles, targeting weak points in the enemy formation that even centuries of Glithari military experience had overlooked. By the time the enemy realized the true nature of the attack, it was too late. Entire fleets were immobilized, crippled, or destroyed. Celine did not gloat. She walked among her crews in the command deck, observing the coordination, focus, and ingenuity that had allowed them to achieve what no one believed possible. "This is why we fight," she said softly to her chief strategist, Dr. Ilana Soren. "Not for glory, not for conquest. We fight to prove that no challenge is insurmountable if we adapt, if we think differently, if we refuse to surrender. Humanity's strength has never been in sheer power alone. It has always been in our ability to overcome what others believe impossible." The fall of Zarkath was a turning point. It demonstrated that humans were more than survivors or scrappy underdogs. They were strategists, innovators, and a species capable of reshaping the galaxy's balance of power. Entire civilizations took note, realizing that a handful of humans could dismantle the industrial heart of an empire once thought untouchable. The Glithari, humiliated and stunned, were forced to retreat, nursing both wounded pride and decimated forces. For the Terran expeditionary forces, victory at Zarkath was more than military success. It was validation of humanity's unique strengths. Celine's strategy had combined technological innovation, psychological insight, and human adaptability into a single, devastatingly effective campaign. Her soldiers had proven that creativity and courage could rival centuries of conventional wisdom. The galaxy, long confident in its hierarchy of power, was beginning to understand a terrifying truth. Humans could not be predicted, contained, or dismissed. Even as the dust settled over Zarkath, Celine's mind was already moving forward. She knew the Glithari would rebuild, adapt, and seek vengeance. The galaxy would continue to test humanity's limits, and humans would respond not with brute force alone, but with ingenuity, resourcefulness, and unyielding will. The siege of Zarkath was a testament to the essence of human warfare, to overcome the impossible, to thrive where others fail, and to remind the galaxy that the underestimated can become unstoppable. And as Celine gazed out across the scarred surface of the once mighty industrial world, she allowed herself a quiet smile. The galaxy had once dismissed humanity. It had laughed at them, mocked their fleets, and assumed they were weak. That laughter had fueled the humans' ingenuity, sharpened their resolve, and forged them into a force that no empire could ignore. The siege was not just a battle. It was a declaration. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the months following the siege of Zarkath, the galaxy had begun to shift in subtle yet profound ways. Alliances wavered, empires reconsidered their assumptions, and once powerful leaders now hesitated at the prospect of human involvement. Where humanity had been seen as inconsequential, It was now regarded with cautious awe and, in some cases, outright fear. Celine Kyle, perched aboard the flagship Dauntless Resolve, understood that the war was no longer simply about territory or fleets. It was about influence, perception, and the undeniable power of human ingenuity to change the course of events across light years. The Glithari were reeling from their losses, scrambling to rebuild Zarkath and recover their fleets. The Exerthak and Velkari, once arrogant in their supremacy, quietly reassessed their strategies. Entire star systems that had once dismissed humans as inconsequential were now reconsidering their allegiances, eager to align with a species that had demonstrated the ability to reshape galactic power balances. Human influence was growing faster than any technological or military asset could account for. It was rooted in unpredictability, innovation, and the unshakable will of a species that refused to bow to convention. Celine convened her council of commanders and specialists in the Dauntless Resolve's command center. Holographic maps of star systems, fleet positions, and political territories flickered across the room, each a potential opportunity for leverage. She spoke with the calm authority that had become her signature. "We've proven that humans can achieve what others believe impossible," she began. "But influence is not won solely on the battlefield. We must extend our reach, inspire allies, and demonstrate that humanity's approach, adaptation, courage, and ingenuity is a force that can shape entire civilizations." One of her lieutenants, Captain Ria Soren, raised a question that had been on everyone's minds. "General, the Confederation is rebuilding. They'll return with more fleets, more technology. How do we maintain the advantage when the galaxy adapts to our methods?" Celine's eyes glinted with determination. "We evolve faster than they do. Every engagement teaches us something new. Every setback, every success becomes part of our collective knowledge. The key is not to outmatch them in firepower alone. It's to outthink them, outmaneuver them, and exploit their assumptions. They will always anticipate what humans should do. We must do what they cannot predict." The first test of this philosophy came in the Andros Corridor, a critical passage for trade and military movement between several major sectors. The Exerthak had deployed a massive blockade, confident that no human fleet could force passage. Yet Celine's approach was anything but direct. Rather than sending her fleet into the front lines, she divided it into micro-squadrons, each small enough to evade detection, yet capable of coordinated strikes. Cloaked transports infiltrated enemy sensor networks, deploying electronic warfare payloads that created phantom fleet signatures, while strike teams disabled key communication relays. The operation was a symphony of improvisation. Surthak commanders, trained to respond to predictable threats, were thrown into disarray. Squadrons attacked phantom ships that weren't there, left gaps in the formation that humans exploited, and misdirected their own forces. Within days, the blockade was neutralized, not destroyed entirely, but rendered ineffective. Trade resumed, and human influence in the region expanded, not through conquest alone, but through the demonstration of ingenuity and strategic foresight. Celine understood that the human approach to warfare extended beyond technology or numbers. It was cultural, psychological, and moral. Where alien fleets relied on rigid hierarchies and protocol, humans acted with initiative, creativity, and an ability to learn from mistakes. Even when losses occurred, humans adapted faster than any empire could recover. Every engagement became a lesson, every challenge an opportunity to prove that the human mind was as formidable as any weapon system. The human factor, as Selene called it, began to influence entire civilizations. Systems that had long been satellites of larger empires sought Terran guidance, adopting human-inspired strategies, fleet formations, and tactical doctrines. Scientists and engineers studied human innovation, not merely to replicate it, but to understand the mindset that allowed humans to achieve feats others deemed impossible. Even the Glithari, humiliated but not broken, began to realize that the human impact extended far beyond individual battles. It was cultural, philosophical, and transformative. Selene's vision went beyond immediate victories. She understood that humanity's survival and ascendance depended on more than fleets or firepower. It depended on demonstrating the core strengths of the species. Humans were resilient in ways that aliens could not fully comprehend. They could endure deprivation, adapt to hostile environments, and think creatively under pressure. Where others relied on predictable calculations, humans innovated in chaos, turning apparent weaknesses into decisive advantages. The expansion of human influence was not without cost. Every campaign demanded ingenuity, courage, and the willingness to accept calculated risk. Casualties were inevitable, and yet the human fleet endured. Selene's leadership emphasized that sacrifice was not futile. It was a tool of progress, a reminder that victory often required perseverance against insurmountable odds. Crews rallied around this ethos, understanding that they were part of something far larger than themselves, the emergence of humanity as a galactic force. As the Terran expeditionary forces continued to operate across the galaxy, the ripple effects of their actions became increasingly apparent. Trade routes shifted, alliances realigned, and the cultural and technological influence of humanity spread. Even species that had previously scorned humans now sought to understand them, to anticipate their moves, and to predict their next audacious maneuver. And yet, for all their attempts, humans remained unpredictable, creative, and relentless. Selene Kyle, ever vigilant, knew that the galaxy would continue to adapt. New threats would emerge, alliances would shift, and adversaries would attempt to replicate human ingenuity. But she also knew that the essence of humanity, the ability to innovate, to endure, and to act decisively under pressure, could never be fully replicated or anticipated. It was a quality unique to their species, and it was what allowed one small human fleet to influence entire civilizations and challenge the established order of the galaxy. Even as she planned future campaigns, Selene took a moment to reflect on what had been achieved. The Terran expeditionary forces had proven that numbers and technology alone did not determine victory. Strategy, creativity, and human will could overcome the most formidable odds. The siege of Zarkath and the Andros corridor operations were more than military victories. They were proof that humans could redefine what was possible in a galaxy long dominated by the assumption of superiority. And as Selene gazed at the stars from the bridge of the dauntless resolve, she understood that this was only the beginning. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for centuries, laughed at their fleets, and dismissed their potential. Now, the laughter had ceased. Now, every empire, every fleet, and every civilization would think twice before challenging a species capable of such innovation, resilience, and audacity. Humanity had become the ultimate variable in the galactic equation, a force that could not be predicted, contained, or ignored. One human general had demonstrated this power, but it was the collective ingenuity and will of the species that ensured that this was no mere anomaly. The galaxy was changing, and the humans were at its center. The galaxy had begun to understand a truth it had long refused to acknowledge. Humans were not just survivors. They were architects of possibility, forces capable of rewriting the rules that had governed civilizations for millennia. The Terran Expeditionary Forces, under the leadership of General Celine Kyle, had transformed the perception of humanity from a minor, expendable species into a power whose influence extended far beyond sheer numbers or firepower. The final confrontation came in the rimward expanse, a region previously considered beyond the reach of any organized human fleet. It was here that the combined remnants of the Glithari Confederation, Exertak forces, and Velkari scouts had gathered in what they believed would be humanity's last stand. Over 1,000 warships, capital vessels bristling with advanced weaponry, formed an impenetrable wall of steel and energy across the system. Their commanders had assumed that the humans would flee, negotiate, or perish. They had underestimated humanity's defining quality, audacity. Celine studied the enemy formation aboard the Dauntless Resolve, her calm demeanor betraying none of the tension that thrummed through the fleet. "We don't fight them because we can match their power," she said to her council. "We fight because we can outthink them, outmaneuver them, and turn their certainty into chaos. Their arrogance will be their undoing." Her plan was, by any conventional measure, suicidal. Human ships, smaller, fewer, and seemingly weaker, were to penetrate the heart of the enemy formation. Cloaked strike vessels would infiltrate their ranks, disrupt command networks, and create the illusion of overwhelming human numbers. Specialized hacking teams would manipulate automated defenses, causing them to misfire or self-destruct. Every human soldier knew that success depended not only on courage, but on innovation, adaptability, and the ability to improvise under impossible conditions. As the Terran fleet engaged, the galaxy held its breath. From the first strike, the human strategy became apparent. Cloaked frigates darted between colossal Glithari dreadnoughts, disabling shields and rerouting power. Strike teams aboard cargo vessels, long considered logistical support, unleashed micro-missile salvos and electronic disruption waves that crippled targeting systems. The Exertak and Velkari forces, confident in their coordinated formation, were thrown into chaos. Systems misfired, formations broke, and entire squadrons became vulnerable. But Celine's genius was not in individual victories, it was in the orchestration of unpredictability. While the enemy concentrated on apparent threats, human ships executed maneuvers that defied all expectations. One cruiser, the Iron Resolve, used a series of gravitational slingshots around nearby moons to emerge directly behind a Velkari command ship, firing at point-blank range before the enemy could react. The resulting destruction sent shockwaves through the surrounding fleet, creating gaps that human forces exploited immediately. Human ingenuity was not limited to weaponry. Psychological warfare played a decisive role. Throughout the battle, encrypted broadcasts reached the enemy command chains, simulating the presence of additional fleets, spreading false orders, and amplifying confusion. Alien commanders, trained to anticipate conventional strategies, were forced to second-guess every move. Fear and doubt, emotions they had long dismissed in themselves, crept into their decision-making. Morale crumbled under the weight of human unpredictability. The climax of the engagement occurred when the human fleet, having infiltrated the enemy's center, executed a simultaneous strike on command ships, supply nodes, and warp control arrays. Entire squadrons were immobilized or destroyed before they could respond. In a matter of hours, what had seemed an insurmountable armada was reduced to scattered remnants, retreating into hyperspace with their pride shattered. Humanity had won not by brute force, but by exploiting the very assumptions, arrogance, and rigidity that alien civilizations had relied upon for centuries. Across the galaxy, systems took notice. Worlds that had once been neutral, intimidated by the might of the Glithari, Velkari, and Exerthak, now actively sought human alliances. Merchants, diplomats, and scholars traveled to Terran fleets and colonies, eager to learn the methods behind their victories. Humans had become a cultural and tactical benchmark, an unpredictable variable that reshaped every political, technological, and military calculation. Celine, standing on the bridge of the dauntless Resolve, watched as the last enemy vessels fled. She did not celebrate. For her, victory was measured not in destruction, but in the demonstration of humanity's enduring principle, the ability to adapt, to innovate, and to survive against overwhelming odds. Her crews, exhausted yet invigorated, understood the significance. They were no longer just soldiers. They were representatives of a species capable of redefining galactic history. The aftermath of the battle revealed the lasting impact of the Terran campaign. Star systems that had once laughed at humanity now respected it. Trade networks, previously dominated by alien empires, opened to human influence. Scientific communities studied human improvisation and problem-solving as a discipline unto itself. Humanity's reputation as a species that could think, adapt, and endure in ways alien civilizations could not predict had been cemented. Yet Celine knew that the war was not over. The galaxy would continue to evolve, and threats would arise that required new forms of ingenuity. But she also knew that humanity's defining strength had been proven. One species, united by adaptability, creativity, and willpower, could change outcomes that seemed impossible. She had shown that a single human mind, directing the collective talent of a species, could turn even the most hopeless situation into a triumph. As the Terran expeditionary forces returned to the Sol system, the stars themselves seemed to acknowledge humanity's place among them. Reports of victories, strategic brilliance, and audacious operations spread like a wildfire through the galaxy. Entire civilizations whispered the same realization. Humans were not merely survivors, they were a force that could not be ignored, predicted, or defeated. In her private quarters, Celine reflected on the journey. From small, vulnerable fleets to victories that reshaped entire regions of the galaxy, humanity had proven that the impossible was merely a challenge waiting to be met. She smiled at the thought. One human general had changed the course of the galaxy, but it was the collective ingenuity, courage, and indomitable spirit of humanity that ensured the future would remember them not as conquerors, but as a species that refused to bow, even when the odds were impossibly stacked against them. The galaxy had laughed at humans once. It would not make that mistake again. From the smallest shuttle to the largest warship, from the silent calculations of engineers to the bold maneuvers of fleet captains, humanity had proven itself unpredictable, resilient, and unyielding. One species had demonstrated that courage and creativity could outweigh size, technology, and centuries of assumed superiority. And so, as stars burned in the vastness of space, a single truth echoed across countless worlds. The galaxy would forever remember humanity, not for their ships, not for their weapons, but for the unbreakable human spirit that had dared to defy the impossible.